So here we have an Angular application generated using the Angular command line interface. So it's just a regular application, that's it. We're gonna install all the dependencies. Well, now that we make sure that we have everything, we're gonna go ahead and use the command line interface again to create a new component. Okay, so here we do, I don't need to do this. Okay. So now we're gonna just simply create So here we have a brand new Angular application generated using the Angular command line interface. We're gonna start by creating a new component, once again using the command line interface. So this is gonna be our counter component. Right. So now if we take a look at the structure, now we have a counter component, and we see that it has CSS file as a placeholder, HTML that simply says counter works. We have a TypeScript file representing the component. As we can see, it's pretty empty, but points to the proper HTML and CSS. And it also adds a unit test. So this is actually quite good, right? And now the command line interface is pushing us towards writing unit tests, right? So this is pretty encouraging for a developer in terms of practices and what should happen in order to deliver quality in a product. So this is good. So we're gonna go ahead and just run test. So npm run test. Out of the box it uses Karma and Jasmine and testbed. And so it's actually working through all these things. Yeah. And we see that we got ourselves the summary of our tests. So there were 4 specs for tests being run. We see that we have one for the counter component and that it's for the should create. And then we have one for the app component, create the app, have as title app, and render title. All right. So let's take a look really quickly at the spec, right? So if I look at the test that it's been generated out of the box, it says that we should expect the component to exist, basically, right? So to be instantiated, to be truthy. So okay, let's consider this just boilerplate that was generated to us, and let's forget about what the test is really doing, because right now it's really not testing anything of value for the user. Let's say it like this, okay? But let's look at the one that was generated out of the box by the application itself, right? But the boilerplate of the application when we created a new one. So that one corresponds to this component. As you see here, it has a variable, a property of the component that's called title. And then if we see on the HTML itself, if we look for title, you will see that it's actually being used. We're interpolating that variable in the HTML. So if I run it, it will say whatever it's here in the title. In this case, it's going to say up. So if we look at the unit test for this, you see again a little bit of the same boilerplate on the top, while we basically await for that module to be configured and the component to be compiled. And then basically we create a component using testbed, and then we basically have the same unit test that it's kind of validating that the component exists, which again for the user doesn't mean much. And then now let's look at the next one. So it says that it should have as title up, right? So that's great. I mean, we're testing the logic of the component, so that's a step forward. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean that our application is actually, being tested. So let's make an experiment of this, right? So, and we can even look at the second one as well in a minute. So this one, it should render title. Now that is a little bit more interesting, right? So it's basically, it's looking at the components, and then it basically looks at the elements, and using a query selector by using the class content, then we try to find a span that has text content that matches app is running. Alright, so let's consider these two things, right? So again, what we're trying to analyze is the out-of-the-box generated tests, and whether this pushes the developer in the right direction. Let's say it like that. If the tool is the right one for us, right? And in this case, I'm talking about what is generated out of the box by the component generator, and if the unit test, the Jasmine testbed, the combination of tools that we're getting is the right one. It pushes our engineers in the right direction. It doesn't require discipline. You know what I mean? It doesn't require for us to agree not to do certain things. It automatically pushes that in that direction because we don't have many other options. So let's see what happens. So we are running the test right now, and let's see what happens when I change this by something else, right? So let's stop doing. Let's add a different variable to our component. So we will have another one, okay? And this is gonna be something, right? And now, okay, let's go ahead and use something here, or another. Now all of a sudden one of the tests is failing. Let's see which one. Expected something app is running to contain app is running. So it's the latest one, right? It's the last one. So this one is failing, but this one is not. So let's say that a developer came in and actually changes things, right? So let's go back to our previous version of this. Just leave something in here, and then let's delete this one. Okay, I'm sorry, this should be title, and then on the component itself, let's change it by this, right? All right. So let's see here, we are looking for title. Oops, or not. Let's see, did I change it? No, okay, yeah. So in this one, we're printing out title, which in our case is gonna say something, and this guy is, has this variable. So if we look at the test now, both are failing, right? So both this one should render 10.5 as title up. So this is good. Both of them are failing, and so the value for the user is that we are spotting this error before it happens in production, so the user doesn't have to see it. But here's what really kind of doesn't work for me on these auto-generated tests, right? Is that when I change the variable here, when I change it over here for something else, right? Or even if I delete this, you see, this test is failing, which is really what it's supposed to do, right? My user is no longer able to see the title that I intended to be, so my component is failing basically to deliver its value. Now this one is really not failing at all. It's just okay because we are actually tapping onto the components API, to the components instance, and reviewing what's going on in there. So this is more of an implementation detail, whether this is actually what the user is looking at. So I think this one is purely wrong. If this was actually some reusable logic, like the calculators algorithm or something like that, yeah, certainly. I mean, I would certainly do a unit test like this. But when it comes to the component that renders HTML, I want to review what the user is going to do and what the user is going to look at. So this is actually a good test. This one is not. So that's my first point in this, is that the auto-generated test that we see on counter, this is kind of pointless. I would actually feel much better if the out-of-the-box test would actually make it fail. So it actually means that I need to do something about it. So I think that would be a more valuable default experience, because what I usually see in some projects is that people auto-generate the components using the command line interface, and then, you know, when you run the test and the coverage, it looks like you are testing part of the components that you created, but you really are not. And this doesn't mean that, you know, the component will work the way that we want it. I mean, it's perfectly fine to have a boilerplate being saved by the you know, the works being saved by the command line interface. That I think everybody appreciates, but this is not good enough, right? And then the one that already comes from the application has this example, which I think again pushes people to work on the API of the component, on the exposed parts of the component instead of the generated one. And if I go to the Angular testing tutorial, I think they have an example for the counter. If I remember correctly, maybe not. Okay, basics of testing components. Right, it's not a counter, it's a light switch component. So here we have a template where we have a button, and then we have the message that we show, and it has a few things that are public. So is on, and all these different things, all these different functions. And so as we go below and you see the actual examples, you see that we're actually validating where the internals, the implementation details are actually, you know, one way or the other. So my expectation is whether it's on, is false, or true. So I'm testing the internals of the component. In this case, I would actually, you know, like to see maybe if this is valuable for the user and I need to display that information. I would like to see that on the screen. Or look, given that we have a message that actually is based on this internal part of the application of the component, which should not even necessarily be exposed, we could validate whether the message is one or the other and still get the same output. So this, I think, again, it's a bad example of testing implementation details. Right. The message, when we test the message, what the user says, now we're testing the valuable, what is valuable for the user. Right, so these are the things that I noticed from the examples and the command line interface that I think are not ideal. So in the next video, we're gonna see a different tool that actually pushes the developers in the right direction, and, you know, preventing them from accessing the instance and then acting more like users of our application, which is in reality, that's what we want to, that's what has most value to start testing right away.